Welcome everyone. This is our second lesson for the genetics unit this year for our year 10s. This lesson is going to be all about looking at Punnet squares, how to do them and how to address some of the questions you might get in an exam or in a test scenario. So we're going to start off with the basic steps that you should take when completing a Punnet square question, and then I'm going to go through some examples of some of the kinds of questions you're going to come across. So the basic steps. First of all, obviously, read your question and then find out the genotypes of the parents. There's going to be all sorts of clues specifically in the phenotypes of the parents, but be sure that you read your questions carefully as they will have the information that you need to find out what the genotypes are. A couple of things to keep in mind. The dominant phenotype, if it's showing up, can either be heterozygous or a homozygous dominant. Unless it specifies, you really don't know which one they're talking about. So if you don't know, you may have to do a Punnet square for each type. However, usually the question will specify if the person is homozygous dominant or heterozygous. On the other hand, if you have a recessive phenotype, it definitely must be the homozygous recessive genotype, as it's the only way that that type of phenotype will actually show up in an individual. So once you've got the genotypes, you're going to place them into the Punnet square and complete the crossing. On the next slide, I'll show you how to do that in a bit more detail. But you're going to have 4 sections of each Punnet square, each giving a possibility of the type of offspring that you could get from the parents. Sometimes you're going to have a bit of doubling up, or you may in fact have all of the same options depending on what kind of parents you have. After you've done your cross, you can actually find the genotype and phenotype ratio. Now this is expressed either as a percentage or as a fraction out of 4, maybe out of 2 if you're going to, go down to the lowest common factor. But it's really clear you have to know the difference between the genotype ratio and the phenotype ratio and make sure that you are referring to the right one depending on the question that's being asked of you. And finally, answer the question. Make sure again you read carefully what's being asked and specifically answer said question. It's very easy to lose marks or to get a question completely wrong if you don't answer the right one. So our first problem is from a worksheet, and this is what I call a state the outcome question. It's simply a scenario. They give you 2 parents and you are to find out what kind of offspring these parents can actually produce. So in this question, a species of guinea pig comes in 2 different colors, black and white. Black, capital B, is dominant to white, little b, within this species. If a homozygous black guinea pig reproduces with a white guinea pig, determine the genotype and phenotype ratios of their offspring. So if we go with our first step of determining the parent genotypes, this one is pretty straightforward because not only does it say you start with a black guinea pig, but it specifies what type of black guinea pig. Obviously, if it's the dominant phenotype, it could be heterozygous or homozygous. It states here, this is a homozygous black guinea pig. Here with the white guinea pig, it does not need to specify if it's homozygous or heterozygous because it's only going to be heterozygous. Now, since this is our first problem, I'm actually going to color code the alleles that come from each parent. That way you can see pretty clearly within the Punnet square exactly where each allele goes and how you're supposed to do the crosses. So we've got one genotype for our homozygous black, and we also have our white. Now let me color code. I'm going to have our homozygous black is going to have 2 capital B alleles. Got to give 1 purple, 1 green, and then our white is going to be 2 small little b's. I'm going to have 1 is orange and 1 is blue. Okay, so there is no real way you have to sort out your Punnet squares in terms of putting dad on one side or mum on one side. As long as you clearly have the 2 correct genotypes, you'll still get the same answers in the end. So what I'm going to do is put the homozygous black parent up the top, so it is our capital B, and I'm going to put the white guinea pig along the left hand side. That is our little b and our little b. Now if you follow the colours, you'll see exactly how the cross is going to take effect. So if we start from the purple B, that is at the top of a column, so all squares in that column are going to have that capital B. Same thing with the green capital B. Everything in that second column is going to have a capital B in it. Now let's go with the rows. If we start from the orange little b, everything within that row has to have that little b. And now if we go to the bottom row, everything in that row has to have the little b that is blue. So hopefully you can see from the colours exactly how it is you actually do this cross. A little bit of practice and this becomes pretty straightforward. If you're not sure how it works, feel free to watch this video again and then you can always follow the steps until you get the hang of it. Now, we've completed our Punnet square. We're going to do our genotype and phenotype ratios. Now, the genotypes here, as you can see, all four sections of the Punnet square, we're all giving a heterozygous genotype. So our genotype ratio here is pretty straightforward. It is 100% heterozygous. Now, when stating the genotype ratio, you can either describe it as the letters or you can describe it in words. So you could in fact write with this 100% heterozygous. However, please be careful when you do this, especially if you're referring to a homozygous genotype. You really have to make sure if you say homozygous, you have to specify what type. Is it homozygous dominant or homozygous recessive? Simply saying homozygous will not be enough. Here, heterozygous is very straightforward. I prefer using the letters, but that's because I like to do things faster. Now, for the phenotype ratio, this is the ratio that describes the possible physical traits that come out of this. Because this is a heterozygous genotype, they are all going to have the dominant trait, which in this case is black fur. So therefore, our phenotype ratio is 100% black fur. And that is answering the question, which is to find out the genotype and phenotype ratios. Okay, the next of our questions is what I call a what are the chances question. Usually they will have a question like this that will ask for the specific chance of a certain genotype or phenotype coming out the other end. You'll more than likely come across these sorts of questions in a sex-linked trait question, which may be what are the chances of having a daughter who is a carrier, these sorts of questions. But you can certainly see them in our complete dominance questions like these. In dogs, the gene for type of fur has two alleles. The dominant allele, capital F, codes for straight fur, and the recessive allele, little f, codes for curly fur. What percentage of offspring would be expected to have curly fur from the cross of two straight furred dogs, one that is homozygous dominant and one that is heterozygous? So we're going to start just like we did before and determine the genotype of the parents. Here it's also very, very clear exactly what the genotypes happen to be from the phenotypes. So the first one is a homozygous dominant and the other one is a heterozygous. So our two genotypes, I'm just going to do an arrow here to cheat. The homozygous dominant is of course going to be capital F, and our heterozygous parent is going to be F, little f. Pretty straightforward. Now we're going to complete the Punnet square. I'm not going to do that in colour this time, basically due to time constraints. So I'm going to put them straight into the Punnet square. You can see that the homozygous dominant is going to go up the top and the heterozygous is going to go on the left. We're going to complete our square as previously. Again, you're free to rewind the video at any point and double check the colour coding from the previous slide. But for now, let's go on and finish it. Now here, we don't have to necessarily state the genotype-phenotype ratios, but I'm going to do this A because it's good practice and B because this is one of those instances where the actual ratios between genotype and phenotype are different. So what we can see here is we have two here which are homozygous dominant and two here which are heterozygous. Therefore, the overall ratio is there's a 50% chance of a homozygous dominant offspring and then there's another 50% chance of a heterozygous. Now, both of these genotypes give the same phenotype. Homozygous dominant is also going to be the dominant allele, it's got nothing else in there. So if you're homozygous dominant, you have to be the dominant phenotype. If you're heterozygous, you're also going to be the dominant phenotype. So both of these guys have a 100% chance of having straight fur. Now again, if this was a test scenario, you wouldn't even have to go to that extent. I like to do it for completion. However, the question was actually asking what percentage of offspring would be expected to have curly fur. Now to have curly fur, because curly fur is a recessive, you would have to have a homozygous recessive genotype. There is no possibility here of having a homozygous recessive offspring. Therefore, it is a 0% chance of curly fur. Now keep in mind, this I actually got from a test back from 2014, so it is very much like the kinds of questions you're probably going to come across in your tests, possibly in your exam. Now this last question is going to be called, is it possible? And these are kind of questions that will ask you a hypothetical question. Is it possible to have a certain offspring outcome with a certain set of parents? These are examples where you may in fact have to do 2 Punnet squares because it won't be clear if a certain individual is homozygous, dominant or heterozygous, but you have to explore it, see is it possible to have that certain outcome. Now in this instance, in humans, red hair, little r, is recessive to brown hair, capital R. 2 brown-haired parents produce 3 children, all with red hair. Show how this is possible. Now here, it's a bit different. It said it's certainly possible, but you have to explain it. Now this is probably one of the trickier questions you're going to get because it asks you to make certain logical leaps on your own. So we're going to determine the parent genotypes. Now again, this one here is trickier because you know for a fact that both parents have brown hair. So the possibility of the parent's genotype is either going to be capital R, oops, let's start that again, capital R, or heterozygous. Now it does not specify which is which. However, if you know that the children, all these red-headed children, have only one possibility of a genotype, they must be homozygous recessive little r, and that must come from their parents. And one must come from one parent and one must come from the other. Therefore, both parents must be heterozygous. That is the leap they're asking you to make, and it is the one thing to keep in your mind, to know that you have to get one allele from each parent. And if you've got a recessive child, you cannot have a homozygous dominant parent for that very reason, because there's no little r to come from that parent, so they cannot produce a child that is recessive. So now that we know both of the parents are heterozygous, we can complete our Punnet squares. So let's go with big R, little r on each side. We're going to complete the Punnet square. Now, if we're going to answer the question, what I would expect of you is to complete the Punnet square, perhaps even circle the recessive trait, since that's what the question is actually referring to, and you just write one sentence to say how it is possible. So you can say something like, red-headed child is possible with 2 heterozygous parents. That is all I'd expect. So and I'd probably specify that they have to have 2 heterozygous parents, and if you like, you can do the possibility. So here, despite the fact you've got a heterozygous parents, you still only have a 1 in 4 chance, or a 25% chance of producing that one child that would actually have red hair. So this is actually quite a good example. Even though with every fertilization there was only a 25% chance of producing an entirely red-headed child, this couple in this scenario did it 3 times. So hopefully that's made things a bit clearer for everyone, especially those of you who struggled a bit with the homework task or with tasks in class. Please look over this, ask any questions, and good luck for next week.